Hello and welcome to Khyber Shards, a 5th edition actual play show set in the Eberron campaign world. It's Friday, so we have a Khyber Shards answers, and as you can see, I am going solo today. Today, I'm going to give you 5 quick tips on managing high-level parties. If you've been watching the show and you've seen this most recent adventure, you know that a somewhat unexpected and very powerful ability was used to short circuit an encounter and has continued to be used to great effect in the current adventure. So I want to talk about managing the extremely high power level that players get as they reach the upper tiers of D&D. Um, and this party is, into tier 3, but they're not, tier 4 characters yet. Okay, so let's get into that. First, one, and I would argue most important, don't try to counter their amazing abilities. Don't try to undo when they use a cool ability to solve a problem in a way other than what you intended. The temptation is to be frustrated because you planned this thing and you thought it was balanced and you had all this cool idea and this cool thing and this cool monster you were going to get to use, and then you don't, because as it turns out, they can polymorph your aquatic hydra into a sea bass. There it is. So it just happens. Don't spend all your time working out, okay, how am I going to counter their spell? How many charges of counter spell does the caster need so that I can undo their amazing things that they can do? Don't spend your time on that unless you're dealing with an extremely smart, well-informed villain who might know what the characters can and cannot do, and could theoretically plan for it. Listen, it's very tempting, but here's the thing. One, part of the joy of D&D is a power fantasy. Let the players have it. You as the dungeon master get the power fantasy a lot. Running a dragon or something with a bunch of legendary actions is a lot of fun, and sometimes it gets killed really fast. But that's also true. Sometimes you take down a player character really fast, and they have that experience as well. Less often than you, but in theory, at least, they are the heroes of the story, and the things you're playing aren't. So let them have the power fantasy. You get a power fantasy as a dungeon master, let them have it. Secondly, this is really common in fiction. Odysseus doesn't fight the Cyclops, he outthinks the Cyclops. It is very common in fiction that the hero solves the problem by being clever, sometimes by being clever in extraordinarily simple ways. So it's not, a betrayal of fantasy to have a player think of a way around an encounter instead of fighting it. So don't get frustrated. Let that happen. I know sometimes you've planned and it's really tricky when the players don't go for it or when they find a way around it that you didn't think of. But don't get frustrated. Don't get mad. Keep going. So that's number one and most important. Two, be prepared for summoning. Uh, you'll know that players can summon things, but even if you forget, just be aware that's going to happen, especially with casters. As they get higher up, they'll get access to spells that will let them pull minions into the encounter or take over monsters, or a lot of class abilities have some sort of summoning to them. I mean, right now in the game, Ari has the Warlock's Curse, has the Hexblade's Cursed Spectre following him around. Pog uses his Echo frequently, and Shade has an Animal Companion. And so all 3 of my player characters have a class ability creature participating in fights with them. Now, know the rules, know whether the summoning spell is concentration, for example, very important. Know what happens when they lose concentration. Elementals get mad at you. And be aware of how they work. So know the rules for the different summoning things that your player characters have. That's part of what's coming up here in a second. But be ready for it. Just if your characters do that, then you can balance encounters according to the additional creatures that they're likely to bring to the table. So be prepared for summoning, accept when it happens, Don't always upscale your encounter because you expect them to summon. Sometimes let them summon and let that be the thing that massacres the enemy. It's fun. Listen, the bit in Galaxy Quest where they teleport the rock elemental into an airlock full of bad guys is great. It's not any worse that there wasn't a combat involving the player characters in that scene. It's fantastic. Let it happen. 3, check what changed every time your player characters level up. Player characters level up, just glance at their class. Now, if you're using D&D Beyond, then you can check what spells they chose. If they're playing a caster, you don't necessarily have to memorize all the spells, but it's not wrong for you to ask your player caster, what spells did you choose? I don't always do that, but there's nothing wrong with doing that. Not a problem at all to ask what spells did you add to your spell book, because you need to learn how they work. Now, that said, it's not mainly your job to know how the player's spells work. If a player is going to play a caster, they have the job of knowing how their spell works. Now, you're the final arbiter if there's question of how the spell applies, but it's their job to read the spell. It's not cool if you're playing a caster to pick a new spell because it has a cool name and then show up with no idea what it does and read it for the first time and realize, oh my gosh, I have no idea how this works. It's your job. You're the caster. You need to read your spells and do your best to understand how they work. And then if there's questions, the GM is the arbiter of that. If I understand a spell to work differently from my player character and we come to an agreement that I'm right, and that makes the spell not attractive to them, I will usually let them swap it out, by the way. So expect your players to know their spells, but check what changed when they level up. 4, the action economy. Legendary actions and lair actions are your friends, even on creatures that don't have legendary resistance, even on creatures that wouldn't necessarily have legendary items. I add legendary items to legendary actions to creatures all the time because it's way easier to use that as a dial to make a combat more challenging than adding a bunch of extra monsters in. Better monsters is better than more monsters most of the time. And if you are using more monsters, if you want that horde feel, make the extra monsters swarms or make the extra monsters minions with 1 hit point that can be knocked out. The MCDM Flea Mortals book is amazing at showing ways you can do this. But seriously, if you want to know ways to add extra cool abilities to a monster, go read a 4th edition monster manual. There's lots of things that people didn't like about 4th edition, but I will die on the hill that the 4th edition monster design was the best monster design that D&D has done to date. It's outstanding. Go check it out. Steal abilities, tack them onto your monsters. It will make them more interesting, and it will give them more things to do during a turn. It will give them extra reactions. It will give them extra bonus actions. It just gives them a lot more to do than your average 5th edition stat block. So instead of just adding a whole lot more monsters, make the monsters that you have better, especially balance them to the action economy. The number of creatures is not as good a way to balance the action economy, although sometimes that's what the encounter calls for. But in my experience, adding actions, adding abilities that give the monster more opportunities to act does a much better job of balancing the action economy of the encounter, especially if some of those actions can take place when it's not the monster's turn. Because if you're fighting, I did a fight between a mid-level party, mid to low level party, and a Hydra recently. And the Hydra gets as many attacks as it has heads. So on the Hydra's turns, it can go crazy. But then you have all of the player character turns between then. I think it would be better, and I didn't run it this way, but in my opinion, it would be better to give the Hydra, to have the extra heads that the Hydra has, add a legendary action it can take between turns. So it can make extra bite attacks between turns. It's more interesting. It's a better flow for the narrative than having the Hydra attack 7 or 9 times, depending on how many heads you've got going. So better monsters is better than more monsters. legendary and lair actions are a great way to balance the action economy, because by high levels it's going to favor the heroes so much that you're going to need to counter that idea to balance according to that reality. Otherwise, the encounters will be dull because they'll kill all the monsters really really fast, and most player characters aren't looking for combat to be just breezy. 5. And lastly, and this one is the entirely positive one. Go big. You're the dungeon master. You've got the entire monster manual and all the other available things. Punch your weight. Pull out the things with the legendary actions. Pull out the big dragon. Pull out the multi-headed creature. Adapt monsters to be crazier. Give monsters that are capable of it magic items to wield. If a monster is going to drop a magic item, they'd better be using that magic item to its fullest in that encounter. Go big. High level heroes are so hard to kill unless the dice just completely betray them, that you really can go big. And there's so many ways to bring them back if you do manage to kill someone. And there's so many ways for them to escape if you're overwhelming them in a combat encounter. Go big. Speaking of escape, one way you go big is give your villains an escape hatch, because you risk your big villain getting murked in no time flat. Giving them an escape hatch, especially as like a legendary action, is a great way to preserve a villain. And that's especially important in Eberron campaigns because recurring villains are such a big thematic part in an Eberron game. But I like them in all of my games. So those are my 5 tips on managing high level heroes. We got a couple questions from Emily over on our Discord. If you want to submit questions for KSA, you can do so at our Discord, the link to which is in the description. But here are Emily's questions. First one: any tips for keeping a group together long enough to reach high level without streaming the campaign? I'm assuming you mean a group of players. The answer for a group of characters versus a group of players is a little different. For a group of characters, which I don't think is what you're asking, but just what I would say is, by high level, hopefully, they have enough goals in common to keep them in play. If not, use a downtime to have the party kind of work out what they want to do next and create some group goals. That can be really fun at high level too. If you're not sure where things go, and we're high level and you're not sure why the player characters are still sticking together, having accomplished a bunch of their own goals, propose a downtime and let the players discuss out of character or in character, however you like to do it, what their characters' motivations are now, and see if they can't find a group goal that they'd like to pursue that will give you some plot hooks to keep them together. But if, as I suspect, you're referring to a group of players, it's hard to give advice because it just so very much depends on your play group. I'm really lucky. All the people I play with, whether streaming or not, um, in my home games, are my friends. I don't run any games for any people who aren't my friends. Um, we all have adult schedules, and we're generally willing to work around those. But I don't have players just fading out of my games and it's not because my games are amazing. It's because this is one of the ways that we hang out with each other, and we still want to do that. So it isn't. I really haven't had the problem of players just fading out of the games, unless it's from moving or job changes, and that kind of stuff just is a reality of adult friendship. But I haven't had a lot of problem with that, because the only game I run that isn't with people I am friends with and would want to hang out with, even if we weren't playing D&D, um, oh, this is going to sound mean, is with Patreons. It's a Patreon game I run or that I help run for the Geek Pantheon. And honestly, I really like all the players in that. But we don't live close by and know each other personally in all cases. Some cases we kind of do. So that is the only game that I run where initial motivation for running it was anything other than these are people I want to hang out with because they help fund our podcast, and as a reward, we run a game for them. Um, by the way, if you want to support the Geek Pantheon's podcast, which also helps support Khyber Shards, you can do so at Patreon in the link down below. And one of our tiers involves playing in a campaign with us. So check that out. So yes, that and that one, of course, like streaming, has kind of its own built-in keeping it together. The players are paying to be in the campaign, and so they are very motivated to be there. And me and Eric, who share the GMing responsibilities, have an obvious obligation to it because it is what helps fund this fun stuff that we do. Um, if your players aren't up for prioritizing your game, I don't think there's much you can do to make them. Unfortunately, I know that's not satisfying, and I wish I had some really good tip to offer you on how to keep a group of players together. But the only way that a group of players stays together is if they decide, each of them individually and as a group, that we're going to prioritize making this work. And unfortunately, there's not much we can do to make them do that, no matter how much work we put in. And I know that's frustrating, especially if you put a lot of work in and they aren't prioritizing the schedule. I have a player in my home game who videos into our games, and they do prioritize the game, but they have family obligations that pull them away, and so they're pretty infrequent. Um, I wish that wasn't so, but because what the purpose behind my game is I'm hanging out with my friends, I'm not like gonna drop him from the campaign because of that. When he can make it, we play. He plays. When he can't make it, we play. So that is also maybe a reality, is especially as people get families and adult careers and all of these things that start to make playing D&D as an adult harder. I'm really envious of my high school students who play D&D and just play all the time. Um, is you just kind of have to decide this is when we play, and if you can make it, great. But as long as we've got anything like enough players to have a game, we play. That makes it harder. It requires a little bit of a different kind of planning, but it is the best that I've got, is just be consistent about a schedule so that people know when it's happening, and ask your players to prioritize the game as much as their lives can. And if they don't want to do that, then maybe they don't want to play in the game, or maybe the kind of game you guys want to play isn't a long form campaign. Maybe it's more episodic, maybe it's shorter term, so that players can drop in and drop out as allowed. That's you just kind of have to adapt for what your players can commit to. Unfortunately, that's just how it is. And then secondly, what's the highest level party you've ever DM'd for outside of high level one shots? The short answer to that is 18 is the highest level. That was the level my home game that played the Mummy's Mask Adventure Path reached, adapted Mummy's Mask reached. So our big boss fight took place at 18th level, and it was awesome. That is the highest level I've ever gotten a party to in any edition of D&D. But I want to address the second part of that question, which is outside of a high level one shot. If you're good at high level one shots and like them, more power to you. I don't. I don't understand the appeal. I believe that there's an appeal, and there are GMs who love it. And players who love it. I don't. I don't understand the appeal at all. I've played in a couple of high level one shots, and I found it to be terrible. Here I am. I've got this character. Even when I got to build it, I've got this character. I've never used most of these abilities because I never played a character of this high a level. I don't know these spells really well. I don't know when to apply these spells. I don't know how these abilities are supposed to work. And so and I don't know the character at all. How did the character get to this level? I'm supposed to give personality to this character that I barely know. And so the experience for me of a high level one shot is entirely bewildering. Even more so, the idea of GMing a high level one shot for characters that I haven't gotten to know and gotten to know what they can do so that I can be prepared for it. Because in a one shot, in a campaign, Ari charms the thing that was supposed to be the big fight at the beginning of this adventure. Uh, that means we just move on. But if I'm running it as a one shot, that means my one shot just shrank by a third or half or something like that. Or the climax of my one shot just poofed, isn't there anymore. So I don't understand how to run a high level one shot. If you are watching this and you are good at running high level one shots, I would love to know what your ideas are for planning high level one shots and how you make it fun but approachable for a group of D&D players. I'd be fascinated to hear that. I have never had any luck with that and have never enjoyed it as a player. So yeah, I don't get that, and so I don't run high level one shots. When I run one shots, if I want it to be a challenging one shot, I'll run it like seventh level, fifth or seventh level. You got some pretty powerful spells by that point. You've got multi attacks. The action economy is interesting. There's a lot of cool monsters because you can throw monsters of CR 10 or 12 at at a well equipped group of seventh level characters, and they can handle it. Um, Most of my one shots tend to be between third and fifth level, depending on how challenging I want to make it or what kind of monsters I want to use. So yeah, I don't have any advice on high level one shots. I would love to hear some because my experience with them has not been positive. But yeah, I love high level party because I've gotten to know the party. But yes, 18th level is the highest level party I've ever run for. That is it for this Khyber Shards Answers. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can find links to all of our social media and our Discord and our Patreon and our merch store down in the description below. New episodes of Khyber Shards drop on Mondays, and new Khyber Shards Answers drop on Fridays. And until next time, thanks for rolling with us.